What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of MUT Tips. I'm your host, Sean Taylor from the Made Up Theater, live from the Made Up Theater. Even though we're not doing shows or classes here right now, I wanted to do a few videos here during this whole shelter-in-place time because I love this place so dearly. If you enjoy the video, like it down below, comment with something you would like addressed in a future video, and as always, subscribe on YouTube. It's a great way to help us during this tough time. Help us get to 1,000 subscribers. We're almost there. But let's jump into today's topic, which is improvising the long-form narrative, getting started. The long-form narrative is one of my favorite things to do in an improv because it's so fulfilling to do a story that's never been done before from start to finish. And the long-form narrative can range in time. It can be 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour. Heck, you could do 2 hours. Some people do like 2-act improvised plays. It's amazing. And it's challenging too, probably one of the more challenging formats because you don't have really any reset moment, right? You don't get to be like, oh, this story isn't going well, let's just edit it and do something else. You gotta stick with it the entire time. And I'm gonna do a few videos in this series because there's a lot to go over, but I wanna just get into the meat and bones of how to get started with a long-form narrative and give you some tips. This is mainly aimed at more intermediate, advanced improvisers, but if you're a beginner, keep watching because there's gonna be a lot of good takeaways for you as well. The first thing I really wanna emphasize are names. Naming each other is crucial in a long-form narrative because this is how we identify each other and how the audience identifies what's going on. Because we don't have necessarily props or costumes, we need to convey who we are, not just through our character traits, our personality, but also our names, how we're identified. So the first thing I love to do in just an introductory scene is to name each other, okay? So if there's a character on stage, I name them instantly, and I want to keep reinforcing that name so that we don't have to keep a list of who's who off to the side, right? We'll just know because we're just identifying each other constantly. Don't worry about it sounding weird, okay? Like, even if like in the first scene, you start each sentence with the name of the character you're addressing, you might think it sounds a little bit robotic or even expository, but no, it's helping the story be told. So always do that. A few exercises that you can do is do maybe like a 2-person scene with somebody, but don't use dialogue, just use names, okay? So use your emotions, your eye contact, your proximity, your environment, object work to tell the story without dialogue. You're only using names. So I might, watch somebody come into a scene and maybe they're scrubbing the floor and I might cross my arms and say, Maxwell. And then my partner might rise up and be like, oh, Mr. Jiminy, and then I would say, Maxwell, and just go back and forth, heightening the emotion and telling a story. And ideally at the end of the actual scene that you did, see if whoever's watching or you and your partner can say what happened, There wasn't any dialogue to tell it, but you showed the story. You showed it with your object work, your emotions, and with those names. What was the relationship between you two? What was happening? See if you can try that out. The next thing I want to emphasize is plot. And I'll say this right now, especially when you're getting started, the plot. Because the plot is there to serve you. You are not serving the plot. I've been in a lot of narratives before where ultimately the downfall of the narrative is just that we're so focused on the plot, the quest, what's happening and just like the things around us. And ultimately an improvised narrative is about the characters and the relationships they form along the way. If you've ever seen Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Rings, it's one of my favorite fantasy stories, and it is centered on a plot, right? The whole trilogy is getting to Mordor to throw the ring into the fires and just saving humanity, right? It's a quest. But in the first movie especially, there's a lot of focus on this small band of crusaders who are going to defeat evil, and their relationships too, and all the unique personalities. That's so fun to watch, is how they grow, how the disbandments happen along the way. It's all very relationship and character focused. And yeah, they are going to Mordor, but that's not the primary focus. It's about how this Fellowship of the Ring is being impacted by, what's happening inside, what's happening outside. That's the fun of the story, and that's the intriguing part. A good way to practice not focusing on the plot or the thing, which ultimately is kind of the plot, is do an activity-based scene where you're doing something like pitching a tent or doing dishes, some type of action that you can keep doing the entire time, but don't talk about what you're doing, okay? Don't talk about, give me more soap or we need to scrub harder. I want it to be focused on the characters' relationship to each other and what's happening between them, what is their relationship? And by the end of the scene, have they progressed in some way? Maybe two people started happily doing dishes, but at the end of the scene, they realize that they aren't a perfect couple and they're gonna, break up or something like that. And it was all shown through the activity of washing dishes, right? And again, the plot is the thing. It's the thing, like any type of narrative, if it's just, oh, these characters got to go do a thing so they can do a thing and then they can go back and do a thing. The thing, screw the thing. Improvised narratives are not about the thing. It's about the relationships between the characters, okay? And their growth along the way or the regression along the way. Focus on that because that is going to be the key ingredient to telling an improvised narrative. The next thing I really want to focus on is your improvised narratives are about characters, right? They're not empty vessels with names. They have personality, they have depth, they have, flaws about them. They have a lot of things going on so that the audience can connect with them. And there's a few roles because ultimately within the first few scenes, you need to define the roles. Who's who? We need to know. If at the end of the first few scenes, if you stop the scene and say who is who and you don't know, that's a bad start, right? We got to get to it. Tell each other, show each other who you are in the story. And I've done a video on the protagonist, okay? The protagonist is a really big character in any improvised narrative. Go back and watch episode 9. It's an earlier video where I talk all about Luke Skywalker and how he acts as a protagonist. Just a few key takeaways, though, is the protagonist is ultimately someone who has, a little more grounded in the sense that they're not going to be like a big wacky character like, oh, hey, fellas, oh, want to come to Candyland? I'm going to be the mayor. That's a character that can be hard to connect with. I always say play a protagonist about 90% close to yourself, and the other 10% is open to interpretation, open to make choices that you as a person wouldn't normally do. You can add some personality and a type of voice, that's totally cool, but make sure that you are still grounded in a character that the audience can connect to, okay? Especially if you're in a world like a sci-fi world where everything's crazy. You want to be that fish out of water character because the audience is that fish out of water as well, watching. Now, protagonist is big, antagonist is also really big too, the obstacle of the story. I did another video all about Darth Vader, I'm gonna talk about Star Wars a lot, A New Hope especially, but Darth Vader is a great antagonistic character. In the first one, he's kind of just I'm bad guy. But as the movies progress, he has more depth, right? You can connect with him. You see him as a vulnerable person. And you can do that with an improvised narrative. The antagonist doesn't have to be just mustache twirling villain who's gonna tie up the damsel in distress on the railroad tracks. No, they can have some depth. The audience can connect with them because in their story, in their mind, they are the hero of their own story, okay? They don't see themselves as the villain. And of course, there's other characters as well. I like to classify them as dynamic and static characters, okay? Dynamic characters are characters that also change with the story, not just the protagonist and antagonist. There's other characters as well. Maybe a trusted best friend, maybe a mentor, a love interest. Maybe like in Star Wars, Han Solo's character is a very dynamic character. At first, he's just a rebel, essentially someone who looks out for himself. But at the end of the first movie, he has his own little transformation. He learns to actually care about someone other than himself, other than money, right? It shows some growth. He becomes a rebel with a heart of gold. And there's a lot of other characters, like in Harry Potter, like Neville Longbottom, that little kind of dorky kid who seems like he's kind of one note. He experiences a lot of changes throughout that entire series. So those are great characters. Don't think that if you're not the protagonist or the antagonist that you are just kind of a caricature, just like the mailman or something, right? I just deliver the mail, that's all I do. You can have depth to your character, and you can contribute to the story and change with it as well. And static characters though, like the mailman, okay? Those have a perfectly great place in story because ultimately static characters help paint the world, paint the reality, okay? Think about it in like musicals, you know, in the opening number in Beauty and the Beast, when Belle's like going around town, everyone's singing, there's a lot of like really static characters. There's the librarian, there's the baker, there's the other women who are jealous of Belle, right? They're kind of one note, but they are helping convey who Belle is, right? That's so crucial. And a good thing about static characters too is there's a lot of opportunity for play with them, okay? And I'll get to this in a moment, but play is really big in improvised narratives. You want to like have fun on stage. And I'll be honest, when I'm not having fun in an improvised narrative, it's when I'm focusing on the plot too much. So that's another emphasis that I want to make is don't focus on the plot because it's not going to allow you to have fun and to play. Put the play in improvised play. And here's a long form format that you can try out as a way to start to do an improvised narrative, but I'm not focusing on the narrative or the plot or the story. We're just focusing on the characters and the relationships that are happening. So the first scene will begin with two people, and one person ultimately is going to be designated as the protagonist. The protagonist is going to be in every single scene, okay? They're not going to leave ever. They're always going to be on stage. And we're going to see various, scenes happening and relationships all through the point of view of that protagonist. This isn't how a story will go, but this is how we're going to do it right now, okay? So in the first scene, maybe there's a protagonistic character who's introduced as, someone who wants to go away to college, okay? At some point, somebody off to the side is going to initiate, an edit or a tag out, okay? This could be done in a few different ways, where you can have someone physically go on stage and double tap the shoulder of someone who is not the protagonist. Whoever was double tapped is gonna instantly leave and just kind of go off to the side, and whoever initiated that tap out is now going to do a new scene with a new character, okay? The protagonist stays the same character. So maybe this time it's, a high school crush is with the protagonist, okay? And they are expanding on their relationship together. And then someone will come in and do another tag out at some point to the high school crush. Protagonist is still in there. And maybe they come in as the mother or the father or like a sibling at home. And they have a scene about some type of relationship and exploration, okay? And then, tag out. And just do a bunch of different tag outs around this protagonist and show different characters. You can return to some characters as well. That's totally fine. You can come back in as that high school crush. But feel free to play with different characters, Like play with some static characters who are more like, goofy or fun or maybe a little bit more one note, because again, that's helping paint the protagonist. This is our goal right now. We want to flesh out this protagonist to the point at the end, 15, 20 minutes, however long you want to go. We should have a clear understanding of who this protagonist is, okay? What's their wants, what's maybe a flaw that they have? What's some opportunity for growth? Did they have any growth? What's their status, changed with different characters, Improvised narratives are essentially a story about relationships and characters, but also a status story, okay? They start as the naive, ignorant person who doesn't have a lot of experience, like Luke Skywalker, right? And throughout the story of A New Hope, he gets to that point. He has ebbs and flows. He has some losses, successes, and then he gets to that point where finally, right before he's about to lose, he finally accepts the Force. He uses the Force and saves the day, and he ends up here. It's a great story. Watch Star Wars A New Hope because it's a great reference point for improvised narratives. So try it out. Do this little format. Try to flesh out that protagonist character as well as all the other characters. Define the roles. And ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this episode of MUT Tips. Thank you so much for checking it out. I'm gonna be doing a few more videos focusing on the long form narrative, but again, comment below, let me know if you enjoyed the video or if you want a different topic to discuss, and subscribe on YouTube. Also, big thing right now. Obviously right now, Made Up Theater is closed. I really miss the days of seeing lovely faces in these seats, but right now we need to take care and contribute to a bright future where everyone is nice and healthy. But we really need help. So go to madeuptheater.com, check out information about our classes that are held online via Zoom. You can also check us out on Saturday nights. We're doing streaming shows. It really is helpful. There's a pay what you want scale to watch our shows on Saturday night. I'm gonna actually give you a little discount, okay? If you wanna check out the show for $5, just use the promo code MUTTIPS, okay? All one word, MUTTIPS, MUTTIPS, all right? That'll get you $5 to watch the show, and you can stream that to one device. Multiple people can watch the video, okay? Again, it's all helping keep Made Up Theater alive during this tough time. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time for another episode of MUT Tips. Bye.